Well, good afternoon to you. 3:06 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up today, Steve Milloy joins us, former Trump-Pence energy expert. We'll talk about this ridiculous COP28 conference, where the leader of the conference has now said that all of this fossil fuel panic is very overwrought. It's causing a lot of chaos there. Tim Carney will be with us today at 4:30. He's got a brand new book on American families and what our culture is doing to them. Tim will talk to us about that issue. Miranda Devine is here from the New York Post. That's at 5 o'clock today. Brand new information out from the Oversight Committee involving Joe Biden's family getting paid a whole lot of money, and Joe Biden himself being directly paid by Hunter Biden's company. And Tyler O'Neill joins us at 5:30 from the Daily Signal as we take a closer look into one of the most corrupt districts in the entire country. You don't want to miss it. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Before we jump into the meat of today's program, just one last note of thanks to you, the excellent WMAL audience, for the role that you played in raising an immense amount of money for the Fisher House and, more importantly, for our troops. That's what that means, for our troops and their families. The final number through the weekend, $413,359 raised. That is just a tremendous effort. So God bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the time you spent with us on Thursday and Friday as we were able to raise that money and help out the Fisher House and their angelic work. So again, $413,359. Just a big deal during this Christmas season to take care of all of these guys and their families. All right, let's turn our attention to the news now. The media are going crazy right now, as they so often do, but suddenly it seems they're all on the same page that Donald Trump is a fascist, authoritarian threat to our country. They're all saying it, all the major news outlets. An example of this, NBC's Today Show today, Savannah Guthrie, interviewing who else? Liz Cheney, who has a constituency of 0, asking her today what she thinks of our, quote, democracy and Donald Trump's role in it.
No time for pleasantries after I read this book. You said in the starkest terms, we will be voting on whether to preserve our republic in the next election. You think this is a vote about whether or not we still have democracy in this country?
It certainly is, and Donald Trump has told us exactly what he will do. He will not abide by the rulings of the courts. He will certainly appoint people to office, whether or not they can be confirmed by the Senate. He has talked about using the military in terms that really are fundamentally un-American, including here in the United States. So it's a very dangerous moment, and it's a moment for people to understand that cannot be the path that we go down as a country.
Let's try and break down some of the claims that she makes here. She suggests that he is going to appoint people without the approval of the United States Senate. Well, that's not how it works. If you want to put somebody in who is in a Senate-confirmed position, they only get that job if they get confirmed by the United States Senate. That's how that works. There are all sorts of people they could hire outside of the confines of Senate-confirmed nominees, but among those nominees, you got to be confirmed by the Senate. And I love this game that they play, the hypotheticals here, as if Donald Trump has no track record as president of the United States. We had an entire presidency. We know how he operates. We've seen it. And he operates within the confines of the Constitution. If the court strikes something down, he abides by their ruling. That has been the case throughout. What else? This idea, I love how she's like, well, this election's about whether or not we'll be able to retain our republic, whether or not we're going to, keep our democracy, the constitutional republic. Okay. Yes, but in the inverse from what you're pitching. Entirely. Talking about ignoring court rulings, who is the president right now who's ignored the Supreme Court on a routine basis, including when they tell him he does not have powers that he claims he has? That is Joe Biden and the people around him. Do you remember the eviction moratorium? The court came along and said, you can't do this. They kept doing it anyway. And they kept trying to figure out ways to give bribes to Biden voters who went to Harvard Law School. Like, it doesn't matter what the court says. They ignore it over and over and over again. That's Joe Biden. Joe Biden has taken the United States Department of Justice and deployed it against his political enemies. That's true. Look at the 44 counts against his top political opponent. That's Joe Biden. This fantasy world where Donald Trump is the authoritarian. When voters who prefer Donald Trump would like to get us out of the authoritarian hellhole we're going into right now. That's what it's about. So, of course, this is all a case of projection. Another example of that is how many Trump supporters has the United States Department of Justice targeted during the duration of Joe Biden's time in office? You have a U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia who's dedicated over 1,000 prosecutions to Trump supporters. Over 1,000. And they say they're going to keep going. There was just, in the last few days here, we had an actor who was just arrested, an L.A. actor, a black man who is a Trump supporter, who was just arrested because he was in the Capitol building on January 6th of 2021. His name is Massaquoi. Siaka Massaquoi is his name. He was just arrested for 4 misdemeanors. He was arrested at an airport with his family for the events that took place on January 6th of 2021. He did nothing wrong, he has previously said. I did nothing wrong on the 6th. I did nothing violent. He was inside the Capitol building, social media videos showed. He was just arrested. His home was raided, I should tell you, on June of 2021 when 20 agents armed and outfitted in tactical gear raided his home shortly before 6 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday. That was years ago now. That was over 2 years ago now. Now they're arresting him at an airport in front of his family during the holidays and charging him with 4 misdemeanors for the events of January 6, 2021. What are FBI agents not doing? Well, they're not pursuing child sex crimes anymore, or to the extent that they were before. We've had, and that's not me making that up. That's not some sort of secondhand statement. That's firsthand from FBI whistleblowers saying they were reassigned off of child exploitation cases onto January 6th. What are the United States Air Marshals doing now? We talked about this last week. What was the report on that? The U.S. Air Marshals have been reassigned away from trying to stop acts of terrorism on airplanes to following people who were in or around the capital region at the beginning of January 2021. So this keeps going on. So who's authoritarian? Who's the totalitarian here? That's Joe Biden and company. And here you have Liz Cheney asserting that the real threat to our, quote, democracy is Donald Trump, the man who's running against him, the man who's being targeted by all of the weapons of the state.
You've said we are sort of sleepwalking into dictatorship in the United States. Dictatorship. Is that what we would have if we reelect Donald Trump?
We are sort of sleepwalking, aren't we? I mean, in the sense that you've got all these lefties who are abiding it or actively cheering it on. They're trying to take Donald Trump off the ballot in state after state after state. They are enthusiastic. I was just on the cable network News Nation this morning. They're hosting the debate later this week, the next primary debate. And we were citing some poll numbers as we were chatting, and it was something like 85% of Democrats not only want Trump convicted, but they say if he's convicted that he needs to be out of the race entirely. And that's not, there are it's something like 23% of Republicans who feel the same way. If Trump is convicted, that he should leave the race. But that really goes to show you, doesn't it? Just the authoritarian impulse, how deeply embedded it is into the left now and expressed through the Biden presidency.
Would have if we reelect Donald Trump?
I think it's a very, very real threat and concern. And I don't say any of that lightly. And frankly, it's painful for me as someone who, has spent her whole life in Republican politics, who grew up as a Republican, to watch what's happening to my party and to watch the extent to which Donald Trump himself has, basically determined that the only thing that matters is him, his power, his success, and that is not somebody you can entrust with the power of the presidency.
It's so crazy. Meanwhile, Joe Biden seems to be running for re-election in order to make sure that his family is never held accountable for any crimes. It's all projection. They say that Trump is doing this because he's trying to get out of his crimes. Can he really self-pardon? Does the Constitution really allow that? Why is Joe Biden running for president at 80,000 years old? Why is he running for president again? What advantage does he derive from that? And more importantly, why is Jill doing this? Why is Jill pushing him to do it? Well, they seem to have all the incentive in the world. They're trying to protect the Biden family from any scrutiny, any criminal consequence whatsoever from their family's corruption. And then this question from Savannah Guthrie. She asks Liz Cheney, do you think Trump will try and stay in power forever?
It seems crazy to ask this and even crazier to fathom it, but do you believe if Donald Trump were elected next year that he would try to stay in office beyond a second term? That he would never leave office?
There's no question.
Do you think he would try to stay in power forever?
Absolutely.
If only we had some sort of historic event where we could contemplate what it would look like if Donald Trump were president of the United States. If only. Oh, that's right. Trump was president. Trump did not actually hold on to the Resolute desk and have to be dragged out by his feet. The United States military didn't have to go in and remove him. Trump's challenges to the election amounted to standing in front of microphones and going to courts and asking for the elections to be audited. That's what he was asking for. And then he left office on Inauguration Day. He flew to Mar-a-Lago. What are these people even talking about? Meanwhile, Joe Biden is right now trying to browbeat Congress into submission to give Ukraine more money when Zelensky has said that there's not going to be more elections unless all of these circumstances meet his demands. He can do that. He can just snap his fingers and forbid elections. Is that the democracy we're supporting? It's so crazy. Let me take Chris in Thurmont now, line 2. Chris, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince, how are you doing?
Okay.
I'm getting kind of. I talked to your call screener about something else, but I'm getting kind of sick of this word democracy because we are a representative republic. We aren't a true, full-blown democracy. Now, we have democracy values, but we are a representative republic. And when they keep throwing this, that's the end of democracy, that's the end of democracy, that's the end of democracy, it really chaps my britches because we are a representative republic.
Yeah, we are. But they don't even support a direct democracy. It's not.
And we're watching that go down the tubes.
Yeah, no question.
With this president.
No question. And so this is all, again, a case of projection. Like, what Liz Cheney is insane. She's going on television. She says that, Trump's the real threat. And she's in line, and she's doing this, Chris, in concert with a bunch of outlets. I mean, I haven't even touched on some of these other news outlets this weekend who are all making the same claim. There's a panic setting in, Chris, that Biden is destined to lose this election. And they are very desperately trying to take the lens of focus away from Biden's failures and Biden's excesses and try and demonize Trump.
Yeah, it's all projection. That's all it is. That's all they have right now at this point. Now it's Orange Man bad again.
Yeah, we've seen this before, haven't we? Hey, Chris, thank you very much. This is so Byron York over at the Washington Examiner, our friend Byron, has a good piece up today, as he so often does. It says the anti-Trump alarm goes off. And he describes all of the various ways that the media are all acting right now in unison to declare that Trump is a threat to the country, to our democracy. Number one, on Thursday, the Washington Post published a story that was headlined, quote, "There is a clear path to dictatorship in the United States, and it is getting shorter every day." The piece began this way, quote, "A Trump dictatorship is increasingly inevitable. We should stop pretending." Listen to these people. If they actually believe this, they're conspiracy theorists. But otherwise, they're just deceptive projectors who are trying to cover up for the current authoritarian regime. Number two, Sunday, former Republican Representative Liz Cheney, the de facto leader of the House January 6th committee, said the U.S. is, quote, sleepwalking into dictatorship with the possibility of a Trump victory. Number three, on Monday, that's today, The Atlantic released a special issue. If Trump wins, devoted entirely to articles warning of the threat that Trump allegedly poses to various areas of American life and government. An entire special issue. of the Atlantic. This is like, how when you go to the supermarket, there's a magazine dedicated to Elvis. You can find out like about his favorite sandwiches. Like, no, but this issue's entirely how Trump's a dictator. It's just rage porn for the left. And then here's the fourth example. Today, I saw this article this morning, first thing. Also on Monday, the New York Times published a top of the homepage story headlined, "Why a Second Trump Presidency May Be More Radical Than His First," which reported exactly what the headline promised. And in fact, what's funny about that story? All of these stories are funny in their own way. What's funny about that story is the story begins with the scene from Tiananmen Square. They compare Donald Trump to the Chinese Communist Party. They suggest that he's going to be exactly like them. Isn't that the craziest thing? So how did Trump end up being the guy who was the most like the Chinese Communist Party? This is the lead of it is in the spring of 1989, the Chinese Communist Party used tanks and troops to crush a pro-democracy protest in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. Most of the West, across traditional partisan lines, was aghast at the crackdown that killed at least hundreds of student activists. But one prominent American was impressed, the Times insists. Quote, "When the students poured into Tiananmen Square, the Chinese government almost blew it," Donald J. Trump said in an interview with Playboy magazine the year after the massacre. Quote, "Then they were vicious. They were horrible, but they put it down with strength. That shows you the power of strength. Our country is right now perceived as weak." So they went all the way back to an interview with Playboy magazine from decades ago in order to try and build a case that Donald Trump is an authoritarian whack job. That's it. That's it. And then that's the basis for the whole article. Then they spend the rest of the article saying that Trump's a tyrant, he's going to be a dictator, on and on and on, as if he was never president of the United States. Again, you know what this all comes from is panic over these poll numbers. Biden is right now on track to lose the presidential election. Donald Trump is on track to win it. And that's for obvious reasons. Americans are comparing and contrasting. Biden isn't running against a no-name, somebody who's never held the job before. Donald Trump held the job. And regardless of political party, you were better off 4 years ago. And unfortunately for the White House, people are noticing. So, of course, the media, well, they're trying to scare them back into line. Coming up, we'll be joined by Steve Milloy, an energy expert, former Trump-Pence energy guy, and get into this big planetary summit about the climate as the leader of that summit says, this is all a scam. We'll tell you more. Hey, good afternoon to you. 3:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Tim Carney will be with us at 4:30. We'll talk about American families with him, how things are changing for them. At 5 o'clock, Miranda Devine is here from the New York Post. And at 5:30 from the Daily Signal, we'll talk to Tyler O'Neill. That's ahead. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. One of the top climate officials on the planet is now admitting that there is no science behind the panic and that we are destined to take the world back into caves if we crush fossil fuels. The president of COP28, literally the leader of the conference that's being held right now, Sultan Al-Jaber, said there is no science saying we've got to get rid of all of this. It was captured on a Zoom call where everybody was all getting together to talk about how much they hate the climate, or hate humanity, I guess, and want to get rid of fossil fuels. And he said, well, wait a second. This is kind of a scam. Listen to this.
I accepted to come to this meeting to have a sober and a mature conversation. I'm not in any way signing up to any discussion that is alarmist. I am here factual and I respect the science. And there is no science out there or no scenario out there that says that the phase out of fossil fuel is what's going to achieve 1.5. 1.5 is my North Star. And a phase down and a phase out of fossil fuel, in my view, is inevitable. It is essential, but we need to be real, serious, and pragmatic about it.
We need to be pragmatic. He goes on to say that we have to consider what happens to people.
I'm sorry, I do not accept it.
What I see.
I am not accepting this. I'm sorry. I respect you. and I do not accept any false accusations. I've been very clear about my position. This is wrong. And you're asking for a phase out of fossil fuel. Please help me, show me a roadmap for a phase out of fossil fuel that will allow for sustainable socio-economic development. Unless you want to take the world back into caves.
No.
Show me.
Yeah. I think we can.
We have 8 billion. Give me the
women will be
solution.
part of that.
Yeah, he was talking to a woman called Mary Robinson, supposedly the chairwoman of something called the Elders Group. They're the elders who are telling us that we need to get rid of our gasoline and our gas stoves and everything else. Let's bring in an expert on the subject. Steve Milloy joins us now. He's a senior energy fellow and a former Trump-Pence EPA transition team member, and he joins us on the phone. Hello, Steve.
Hey, Vince. Thanks for having me.
This guy is really ticking everybody off on the left. They're really mad that the head of COP28 is now saying there's no science indicating that this panic is where we should be going.
Yeah, I guess you could say that Sultan al-Jaber let the climate skeptic genie out of the bottle, and this is a problem. They've already made him do a hostage video, kind of getting it back on course with the narrative. But you heard it. You heard him in his own words there, and he's absolutely right. There is no science behind this notion that phasing out fossil fuels is going to in any way limit the temperature that is certainly trapped.
Yes.
The science is actually even more stark than that. There's no evidence that emissions have anything to do with global temperature. But I'm happy with this, and this is certainly like rolled a hand grenade into that whole climate conference, which of course, all the activists were upset about having him as president of the conference anyway, because he is also CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. And there were documents released last week about how he's using the conference to sell more fossil fuels. So yeah, it's really been quite funny.
Well, I've been sitting here thinking, like, wait a second. If the guy who runs it's an oil executive, like, isn't the point like to disable everybody else's energy production so that he keeps getting richer?
Well, sure. So earlier this week, or last week, he announced a $30 billion
Steve, stand by. Steve, stand by. Hold up. It's really difficult to hear you. So what we're going to do is we're going to hang up on you. We're going to call you back and see if we can't get a better connection. So let's try that. So, Corey, let's give Steve a call back. I want to make sure I can hear every word here. But while we wait for Steve, I just want to point out that that the left is, of course, in a panic over all of this, that Sultan al-Jaber said there's no science saying that fossil fuels need to actually be phased out at all. And so John Fossil-Face Kerry is trying to spin all of this away. He was asked to respond to this by reporters, and he talked about something. He just went off in a different direction. He said, that's not the argument. That's not the argument. He said the G7 countries voted that there should be a phasing out of unmitigated fossil fuel emissions. And what there is science for is keeping 1.5 degrees as your North Star. Every decision we make should be geared toward, does this advance the 1.5 degrees, or is it going to be more destructive and take us in the wrong direction? Now, if that's the case, if John Kerry really believed that that was the math and that fossil fuels were contributing to the problem, then why did he fly on a private jet to this conference? If every decision you make has to be done through that lens. What a scam, as always. Steve Milloy joins us again. Steve, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can, Vince.
Okay, and you sound great. All right, so we were talking about kind of the role that the UAE plays here, and how you've got this oil executive running COP28, and I was laughing thinking about this. Like, all he's doing is asking everybody else to stop their oil production so that he becomes the place that you have to go.
Yeah, of course. Last week he announced a $30 billion climate initiative that's going to be managed by BlackRock, and what it really is an initiative to replace, coal burning in poor countries like Africa and India with natural gas and oil. So it's really just, a money-making plan for Abu Dhabi. It's not really going to do anything for emissions. I mean, the whole thing is just ridiculous. I heard you talking about the, John Kerry and the 1.5 degree goal. Of course, that itself is a hoax. ClimateGate, that the emails from 14 years ago, whatever it was,
right.
They revealed that all these numbers are just plucked out of thin air. They're not based in science. This is just, the whole thing is just a freak show. It's been 35 years since climate idiocy was launched, and this is the 28th annual UN climate conference. And guess what? Emissions have gone up 50%, and the world is still here.
Right. Yeah. And there's there's quite a bit here. Like, so for instance, going into this conference, I've seen a couple of headlines, and I wanted to pull them all together for our conversation. One of them is that the Associated Press reported that the global warming isn't actually all that bad. Experts are now admitting. They say the world is heading for considerably less warming than projected a decade ago. But then they go on to say that good news is overwhelmed by much more pain from current climate change than scientists anticipated. Wait, what are you talking about? So there's not that much warming, yet it's terrible? What's the deal here?
Well, their problem is that their climate models run way too hot. They've predicted much more warming than has occurred or is occurring. And so they've got to have an excuse for this. So in that article, you're talking about the excuses that, plants are unexpectedly absorbing more carbon dioxide.
Yes.
I mean, they just make this stuff up as they go along. Their models don't work. There is no scientific evidence showing that emissions have changed any temperature anywhere. The whole thing is a freaking hoax. And, Joe Biden is driving our economy and national security into a wall because of it.
I've got some audio from Hillary Clinton, who's got some remarks now on this subject. Here she is. This is, I believe, and you'll be able to correct me if I'm wrong, an utter lie. Here is Hillary.
We're seeing and beginning to pay attention and to count and record the deaths that are related to climate, and by far the biggest killer is extreme heat. I mean, even in Europe last summer, which has the ability to count and figure out what happened, they recorded 61,000 deaths because of the heat in Europe.
Now, the reason I say this is a lie is because my understanding is the biggest exposure risk is not heat, it's cold.
No question about that. More people die from cold than heat. Europe has not recorded 61,000 deaths. These are just deaths, these are statistical deaths just made up. Emissions have nothing to do with heat waves. Heat waves are, just weather. In the United States, where we have the best data, we can see that heat waves are not in any way correlated with emissions or warming. So she has no idea what she's talking about. She's just lying as usual.
Yeah. Here's Karine Jean-Pierre, Coringe today, on all the ways Biden is saving the planet here.
Under the president's leadership, the U.S. is turbocharging the speed and scale of climate action, both at home and abroad, including our collective efforts to tackle super pollutants like methane. Sharp cuts in methane emissions are among the most critical actions the United States can take in the short term to slow the rate of climate change. President Biden also led and delivered the most ambitious climate agenda ever, and the president will continue to treat climate change as the existential threat that it is.
Steve Milloy, is there any Biden official who emits more hot air than Karine Jean-Pierre?
Yeah, absolutely not. Last year, Biden's Department of Energy issued a report saying that emissions have gone up 7%. Okay, so, even if you imagine that emissions have anything to do with climate, emissions have gone up, and that's under Joe Biden, that's on his watch.
Yeah.
And the reason they've gone up is because we're pumping more oil and gas than ever. Now, does that sound very climate-like to you? No. Of course, Joe Biden has to keep us pumping gas. Otherwise, gas is going to be $8 a gallon.
Right. And yet he's still getting in the way of oil production, despite those numbers. So,
yeah, well...
And if correct me if I'm wrong, but during the Trump years, if you're measuring carbon emissions, didn't carbon emissions go down for each year of the Trump presidency?
Well, yes and no. I mean, during starting in the Obama years, we started replacing coal with natural gas.
Yes.
So natural gas emits less than coal, so emissions have come down. But that's misleading because we have exported our entire industrial base to China. And so now our emissions, we don't have manufacturing or emissions in the United States because we have them all in China. So if you count the, emissions that we've exported, our emissions have gone up like everybody else's around the world. You're going to know your emissions go down when your standard of living goes to hell, like during COVID.
Right. So if you exclude all the human suffering, we're doing great.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this whole thing is crazy. It's unbelievable to me how it's so hard to talk about the truth. You see Sultan Al-Jaber, he talked about it a little bit. He just said, look, there's no scenario under which getting rid of fossil fuels is going to get you to 1.5 C. And he's totally right about that. That's demonstrable. And he has just been dumped on that. Even he has had to walk this back a little bit.
It's wild. One more for you. This is John Kerry announcing that there should be no more coal-fired power plants permitted anywhere on planet Earth. I should note that there's a small note on this piece of audio that there may be flatulence from John Kerry at some point in the audio, so prepare yourself.
We ought to be transitioning out of coal. There shouldn't be any more coal-fired power plants permitted anywhere in the world. That's how you can do something for health. And the reality is that we're not doing it. So, the measure here is really sounding the alarm bell. I find myself getting more and more militant because I do not understand how adults who are in position of responsibility can be avoiding responsibility for taking away those things that are killing people on a daily basis. And the reality is that the climate crisis and the health crisis are one and the same.
So no more coal-powered plants and maybe a little bit of methane emissions from John Kerry today.
Yeah, so, no coal plant anywhere ever has killed anyone. China right now is building enough coal plants to equal the entire U.S. fleet. 20% of our electricity comes from coal fleets, and China is building that right now. So I have no idea what he's talking about. India is burning coal like there's no tomorrow. Indonesia is producing immense amount of coal. Australia, not permitting coal plants. What is he talking about?
So how has global warming slowed during this time frame if they keep building all these coal plants?
Because carbon dioxide emissions have nothing to do with global warming. First off, there's not much global warming.
Got it.
And what we think there has happened has probably been caused by El Niños, not CO2 emissions.
Kerry. John Fossil Face Kerry. Hey, Steve Milloy, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.
All right, Vince, thank you. Yeah, sure.
Steve Milloy, always good to talk to Steve. It is 3:50 now.
Hey, Vince, how are you doing this afternoon?
Good, Sam. What's on your mind, sir?
Excellent. Well, I think Corey accidentally cut off the last piece of that Kerry sound clip because I heard another one that says, and I'm sorry I have to leave, my private jet is idling on the tarmac, and I have to make a trip back home to the U.S. That he said and continued to reiterate, 1.5 degrees is what our focus is. That is our North Star. That is our goal. And my question is, okay, so that is above humanity, socioeconomic factors, everything else.
Yes.
That's the North Star, is the 1.5 degrees. And it's amazing to me that these people are so focused on it. And I have to wonder if somehow, somewhere, some scientist said, you know what, we actually discovered that the natural orbit of the Earth around the sun has tightened up a little bit, and that's 1 degree. One of the reasons we're seeing this slight change. Mm-hmm. These people would lose their minds, and they'd determine, you know what, we've got to figure out how to get a giant solar sail out there to divert our path because they are so narcissistic.
You're totally right. Obviously, the sun is the big ball of gas in the middle of this entire conversation. But there's also, one thing to always pay attention to is when they talk about the impact on humanity, if they talk about it at all. They almost never do. And if they do, they give you half the numbers and not the other, right? So in the case of like heat death, they say, people are dying due to heat deaths. And that's true. That's been true as long as humanity's existed. People have died due to heat deaths. But what they don't tell you is that on net, more humans are living because there are fewer cold deaths right now. They don't tell you because their goal is not to save humanity. It's to consolidate power unto themselves.
Oh, absolutely. And if you look at the whole, what Clinton was bringing up, to me it's laughable because that would be demonstrably easy to point out the facts on that. But their answer to that is taking away the ability to cool or heat out of the customer's hands.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's the same. It's an age-old tale. They figure if they make you sacrifice your children, then maybe they can control the weather. They're really into that kind of stuff. Hey, coming up, the lunacy of the left continues. Hanukkah's canceled because people don't like Israel. We'll explain. That's ahead.